For now, allow me to give you a few reminders for our webinar's etiquette before we begin we proceed to the discussion proper. We ask for the consent of everyone if it's okay if we record the session. And then please mute your microphone if you will not be speaking or if you are not speaking to help keep the background noise to a minimum. And if you have questions, you may send them in the chat box or comment them in our Facebook Live via the Atenews Facebook page. Also, we have a reminder pertaining to the registration. If your organization has not yet registered for this webinar, please take time to register. And the link, I believe, will be provided in the chat box. Okay. We also asked several questions in the registration form to gather data in connection with the goals of our webinar series. There's an item in the registration form that will asks for your consent to allow us to include the data that you have entered for our future scoping research and directory. And we will be disseminating them to all our networks once it is finished. At this point, I will give the virtual floor to Ian Sylvania to give us a brief or a statement of the goals of this webinar series. Ian?
All right, sige. Thank you, Fee. Maybe before I start, we can wait for the Atenews technical team to begin the live in Facebook. Yeah. Gwen?
I'll just ask Son to give the go signal, Kuya Ian, when he has already gone on live. Son, it's live na daw. Okay.
All right. Thank you everyone for joining this this session on the Bangsamoro Bangsamoro webinar on peace, transitional justice, and proportionate youth participation. And this will be our first webinar session, right, in the webinar series. So thank you for giving your time and participation in the forum. I would also like to thank the team at Atenews and YPM for organizing this, right? Also, thank you to our guests, our speakers, as well as our reactors for allowing us to host them for this discussion today. So YPM, as a nonprofit organization concerned with peace and security issues in the region, envisions a society where the youth has proportionate participation in discourses specifically of human rights, education, and community peace building. And one of the ways that we actualize this is to conduct forums and conferences discussing issues related to our priority areas. And one of our priority areas is really about channeling the localization of UNSCR 2250 or youth peace and security in the context of what we experience in our day-to-day lives in Mindanao, especially those in conflict-stricken areas. So this webinar series will be specifically tackling about the state of peace and transitional justice, as well as how these are intertwined with proportionate youth participation issues in the Bangsamoro region. And hopefully that this platform will be able to empower young people of diverse backgrounds to be proactive in community peace building. Yeah, we're also following UNSCR 2250 here. And according to UNOY, or the United Nations Young Peace Builders Network, I don't know if I read them right, but it's an organization network mostly who's based in the Netherlands, and they're also pushing for the localization of the UNSCR 2250 across the globe. And the goal really is to support a new narrative that the youth can hold, can participate as proportionate agents, right, in the discourses of peace mostly, and beyond that, other discourses that concern our generation and our future as well. It also brings us the recognition and legitimacy as proportionate agents in socio-political issues in our country and across the world. It also brings us visibility. So, all right, I think that's it for me. So thank you very much again to everyone who are here and who have given the time and effort to be here as well, even though it's a challenging period for us. Steffi?
Thank you, Ian. Now I will be introducing all our speakers and our reactors for this afternoon. So for our first speaker, she holds bachelor's degrees in English and Political Science from Holy Name University in Tagbilaran City, and also she also holds a master's degree in anthropology from Silliman University in Dumaguete City. And she completed all her academic requirements, leaning toward a postgraduate degree in anthropology at the University of Hawaii, Honolulu, USA, on an East-West Center scholarship. She has also presented papers abroad, such as on gender and violent extremism at the Philippine Studies Conference at Hiroshima University, Japan, on a travel grant from the UN Women, and a paper on the politics of belonging, inclusive peace and security among grassroots communities in Muslim Mindanao at the 10th EuroSeas Conference held at Humboldt University in Berlin, Germany, among other papers that she has presented. She is also the first Muslim and woman editor of the Mindanao Cross from 1991 to 1995. The Mindanao Cross is a community paper published in Cotabato City since 1948, it's a paper owned by a Catholic missionary organization, the Oblates of Mary Immaculate. Her groundbreaking work on the interface of illicit drugs, armed conflict, and politics in Maguindanao and Lanao del Sur is a chapter in the book Out of the Shadows, Armed Violence in the Real Economy in Mindanao, which has been given a National Book Award in the Social Sciences by the National Textbook Development Board in 2017. She has done a variety of consultancy work with some international agencies supporting the BARM, like the Ministry of Basic, Technical, and Higher Education, as well as volunteer work for the Independent Working Group on Transitional Justice, dealing with the past as one of its conveners. Our first speaker is none other than Professor Rufa Kagoko Guillaume. For our second speaker, he is a licensed professional teacher from Davao City who upholds Mindanaoan youth empowerment through various initiatives being implemented by their youth-led and youth-serving national governmental organization, the Mindanaoan Youth Development Center, Incorporated, in which he serves as the board chairperson since 2016. The MYDC Incorporated envisions to produce young and empowered Mindanaoan leaders, environmental stewards, and beacons of culture and traditions of Mindanao. In its initiatives, youth participation in program and policy development and promotion of peace building and interfaith dialogue are being highlighted and prioritized. He is also a council member of the Young Mindanao Professionals for Peace, a network of youth leaders from various areas in Mindanao and of different fields who were trained for almost a month in Hiroshima, Japan, under the Hiroshima Peace Building and Capacity Development for Bangsamoro, Mindanao. He currently serves as the Deputy Executive Director of the Al-Kalam Institute for Islamic Identities and Dialogue in Southeast Asia of the Ateneo de Davao University, the primary office in the university, providing opportunities for the Ateneo community to engage with Mindanao communities, especially in the Bangsamoro, to contribute in the efforts towards sustainable peace and development in Mindanao. Please welcome our second speaker, Mr. Kenny Lloyd Angon. For our first reactor, she's currently the Knowledge Management and Social Mobilization Officer of the Initiatives for International Dialogue, or IID, an advocacy, solidarity, and policy organization promoting South-South solidarity and people-to-people internationalism with works focused on conflict prevention and peace building, democratization, and the right to self-determination in Southeast Asian region, particularly in Mindanao, Burma, Timor-Leste, South Thailand, and West Papua. One of her main focus programs involves IP accompaniment, including the IPs in the BARM region. And in 2009, she took part in the Bangsamoro Learning and Solidarity Mission to Timor-Leste, dubbed as From Bullets to Ballots, Bangsamoro Learning Visit to Timor-Leste on political party transformation towards democratic governance, transitional justice, and post-conflict peace building and development challenges together with contingents from the Bangsamoro Parliament. The United Bangsamoro Justice Party, former IP Commissioner of the Bangsamoro Transition Commission, and youth and civil society representatives. She also works alongside civil peace service programs as a local expert under its partnership with the German Development Cooperation, GIZ. And currently, she is a graduate of sociology in Ateneo de Davao University and is also undertaking Juris Doctor degree in the same institution. Please help me virtually welcome Ms. Kyle Baksal. For our second and last speaker, he is the second reactor for this afternoon. He's currently working as Regional Information Officer of the Bangsamoro Information Office, based in the Bangsamoro Government Center in Cotabato City. He finished his mass communication degree at the Ateneo de Davao University, where he served as Student Council Vice President for 2 consecutive terms, while concurrently serving as the chairperson of its campus clubs organization, becoming the first Mora to do so. He was actively involved in various social civic programs centered on the Bangsamoro peace process, along with engagements on preventing and countering violent extremism. His tenure in Ateneo also paved the way for the creation of the Salaam movement, an intra and interfaith organization that provides peace initiatives and programs that addresses nuances on the diversity of Mindanao and its people. He went on to travel all over the country, promoting and advocating the support for the GPH-MILF peace process and the eventual Bangsamoro Organic Law. His work on peace process was also manifested in his involvement in various parts of the world, including his participation on the Initiative for Peace in Nipochon United World College in Hong Kong, and various programs in Indonesia, Malaysia, and Thailand. He's a proud alumnus of the Kennedy Lugar Youth Exchange and Study Program, Batch 8, where he spent a year of intercultural experience in Forest, Ohio, USA, back in 2011 to 2012. He remained active with the YES Alumni Association and AFS Intercultural Programs community, eventually leading him to become the latter's chapter president in Davao. In 2019, he represented the YES Alumni Philippines during a social enterprise workshop and ECA alumni workshop in Washington, D.C. and Arlington, Virginia, respectively. Above all, he is a son of Mindanao and the Bangsamoro. Our second reactor for this afternoon is none other than Mr. Georgiani Sinswat. So, reminder, for our speakers, they are given 15 to 20 minutes each to discuss or react to discussion. And then after all the speakers have been given their time, we will give time for our participants to ask questions to our speakers. At this point, we will give the virtual floor to Professor Rufa Kagoko Giam.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. First of all, I thank the organizers of this webinar for inviting me. Perhaps I'm the only odd one out here, as I'm the oldest. All of you are in the prime of your youth, and I'm inspired by being, that's why I love teaching a lot, because it makes me young. It rejuvenates me, and participating in webinars like this is like teaching in a way, except that I don't see my audience physically. Okay, so I'd like to share my screen. Let me. Can you see it? So as you will notice in my title, I'll be focusing on something that is very close to my heart, and it is transitional justice. I know that it's also talking about, the topic for today's webinar will be focusing on the transition in the Bangsamoro Transition Authority and in the region as a whole. But I want to focus on this because I believe that we start off with this series with a basic item in your huge agenda for this series, which is peace and transitional justice. Am I right? So, and then towards the end of my presentation, I'd be presenting a lot of challenges for the youth for you to take up on as part of your youth development agenda to address the current situation that we are facing now, not only in the region, but also throughout the country. Okay. I'm looking at transitional justice as something like crossing a bridge. I'm not sure if you are familiar with this bridge. This is an actual Philippine bridge. I mean, in my courses on transitional justice in different parts of the world, especially in Switzerland where I got it, the bridge that is shown is usually a European bridge. I was looking for a picture of a local Philippine bridge. And this is a bridge connecting the two river banks of a very famous river in the province where I come from, in Bohol. So this is the Lobok River Bridge, which is made of bamboo, but underneath it is a plank of steel braces. So it feels like it's flimsy, but it's actually sturdy, but it shakes a lot. So it is like a metaphor for what I'm talking about. That we want to get out from our dark, violent past. We are coming from the other side where we come from a time frame marked by a lot of atrocities and human rights violations. And I'm talking about especially the darkest part in Philippine contemporary history, which is martial law. And it's moving towards, when we cross it, we know that our present is not yet exactly smooth, so it's shaky because we have a lot of things that shake us not only physically but mentally as well, as we're bombarded with everyday issues about the kind of politics we have, the kind of leaders that we have, and most especially atrocities left and right associated with state security agents like the Philippine National Police. So we want to move out of this dark past and shaky present to move towards a future which is brighter, more peaceful, and more inclusive for everyone to take part in. Okay, so I'd like to share with you next the framework that we're using in this is the Swiss Dealing with the Past framework, where we see the framework for transitional justice in terms of a circular image containing the four pillars of transitional justice, which are the right to know, the right to justice, the right of reparation, and the guarantee that past atrocities will not recur anymore in the future. I'd like to go back to each one specifically, but I'll focus on things that on the some of the pillars that the youth can come in with specific things that you can do, actually doable things that you can do as you can initiate at your own different peer groups or in your universities or anywhere you are. Um, so I'll go back to these different parts of the framework. But basically, dealing with the past and transitional justice is just a framework for addressing impunity and to provide justice to past victims of systematic human rights violations. When I talk about systematic human rights violations, it would include like what we consider as emblematic, meaning that it is so massive that the ordinary courts of law that are available to citizens in a normal setting would not be adequate in order to address. And therefore, there should be what we call mechanisms for transitional justice that would give government and the constituents and its constituents satisfaction in terms of addressing past atrocities. And I think that because you are so young, you were not yet born, I guess, during the darkest part of our history in martial law. And so having not experienced it in actual, I mean, maybe some of you have experienced it vicariously through your readings, but it's different when you have encountered the horrors of war in the past. And war is something that can brings out the beast in human beings. It is a dehumanizing experience. It will turn friends into enemies because it will stir in everybody's consciousness the kind of buried animosities, enmities that have been there as a result of some strategies to divide the people in the past, especially by our colonial masters. So as I proceed, I give you another icon that shows you, wait a minute, let's go back to this, that through the dealing with the past, and there has been a lot of, especially when I share this framework with so many audiences, the main argument against this is, why are you bringing up the past? I mean, especially the painful past. Some people will say, let the past be gone. Let bygones be bygones. But you see, there's also another argument to that. When you don't deal with the past adequately, the past will always remain in the present and in the future. In other words, if you don't learn lessons from the past, you'll not be able to deal with these kinds of things in the present, and therefore you will not be able to plan for the future. And that is why, even if it is painful, we have to go through this, because not acknowledging that the past has happened, not acknowledging who are to be held accountable for past atrocities, will remain a source of future recurrence of the same kind of atrocities that happened in the past. And that is why we continue to experience that. I think all of you are witnesses, however virtually may be, of the kind of terror and horror that people in Marawi experienced for 5 months from May 17 up to October into 2017. And we were made witness to that in our living rooms, how dreadful it was for the people there. And even until now, the suffering continues, as there has been no transitional justice mechanisms put up for this particular massive atrocity, causing the death of thousands and the displacements of even more hundreds of thousands of people to different places in the country. So we're looking at transitional justice as a way to make societies deal or cope with violent past, but not to remain there, but to move out of this anger of the past and transform this into sources of uh, initiatives that will lead towards conflict transformation, towards healing and reconciliation of a divided society. So we're looking at a continuum, and that is why that explains the kind of framework which is circular, because there is no beginning and there is no end. So in other words, whatever needs to be done that is needed immediately, you can do it. You can start with the right to know, for example. So looking at this, we start with, as I have said, you can start anywhere, but I think basically we need to know that, sorry, just a minute. We need to start with what we call the right to know. The right to know includes the individual right on the part of the victim and his or her family to know what happened to his relative, her relatives, how he was killed, or were they tortured, or were they killed defenseless? Like when they are all killed with the bullets entering their backs instead of the front. That shows that they were defenseless, and it was not even in the articles of war or in the convention for war. Some wars are oppressive, or even more oppressive, because they are fought on an imbalanced forces. The quantity and the intensity of the kind of ammunitions that people have on both sides of the battlefield might not be equal. And so, of course, you are guaranteed that those who have less ammunition, less power would be defeated. So the right to know urges any kind of transitional justice mechanism to demand from government, because it is a collective right of society, because it is an obligation of the state that requires the state, because the state is the only institution that is responsible for the behavior of its agents, especially its security agents, because the agents may have acted in a way that it's not the order of their superiors, but nevertheless they belong to a group that is considered organized by the state and sanctioned by the state. For example, the Philippine National Police and the Armed Forces of the Philippines. And in addition, you have paramilitaries, which are organized by these two major security agents of the state. So for the right to know, there are 4 ways. How do we know the truth? There needs to have a truth commission. For example, in the Marawi siege, there is a bill pending in Congress to compensate the people of Marawi for the loss of their houses and other properties, and for some kind of reparation for lives lost. Actually, when we talk about reparation, which we'll talk about later on, it's not really like a person has a cost, a human being has an equivalent amount of money. No amount of money can bring back a dead person's life. And so some people, when we were conducting the listening process for the TGRC sessions in the past, like in 2014 to 2015, all of them were saying, what's the use of asking for reparations when the dead cannot be brought back to life? But compensation is actually not in the term of actually paying for the life that was lost, because there's no amount of money that can compensate for any life. What you can perhaps compute are opportunity costs for the loss of life, because you can compute like when supposed supposed to be when they were not killed, they will still go on and live a professional life and they will earn income. And so you can just uh, roughly compute how much money they are able to earn given a lifespan of, let's say, 60 years. So, but still that is not an actual cost, uh, amounting to the value of human life. But you can always put a price on buildings, structures, physical structures that have been destroyed as a result of war. But human lives are different. And that is why you need to have a mandated Truth Commission, so that the Truth Commission will ferret facts relating to who, what, where, when, or how of human rights violations. In news writing, if some of you are trained to be journalists, this is what we call the 5 W's and 1 H of asking questions. Who was the victim? What was used as his murder weapon or killing weapon? Where did it take place? When did it happen? How was he killed? And other questions of why was he killed? What's the motivation for the killing? For example, Marawi, we need to know exactly what were the situation, what were the conditions that led to that decision of carpet bombing Marawi? Could it not have been prevented? Meaning, there have been a peaceful solution to it, or a much lesser an initiative that would be lessening the number of dead and the extent of the damage that has been inflicted because of the 5 months war. And we know that when dealing with the truth, people have different versions of the truth, and you know that very well, because when information is passed from the one mouth to another, it tends to be either exacerbated or diminished depending on who you are talking to. So that there is what we accept, that there is what we call a multiplicity of truths. There is what we call narrative truth, which is the truth that as people experienced by the victims. For example, in one of our listening process sessions, one incident was perceived as an armed encounter between MNLF and the armed forces of the Philippines. But for another community, it was not an encounter, but it was a massacre. So the same incident interpreted in many ways, depending on who you are talking to and depending on where they are coming from. But there is what we call the forensic truth, which is provided for by investigative processes, and a stringent investigatory discipline is needed in order to ferret out incontrovertible truths, meaning you cannot dismiss that as inadmissible to court because it holds, in other words, it puts beyond reasonable doubt the quality of evidence is considered as something that is beyond reasonable doubt. So we look at the forensic truth, for example. Another way of knowing the truth is through several times the Philippine government has organized fact-finding and investigative commissions. For example, if you maybe are not able to recall that because we were not born yet, but there was an Agrava commission to investigate the assassination of Ninoy Aquino, the father of the late former president. And there was fact-finding for many incidents relating to corruption and other incidents of plunder among government officials. But these are groups that have no police power. They will only present the facts to the committee, for example, to the Senate Committee on or Blue Ribbon or whoever is tasked to recommend some sanctions. But these groups will only be investigating for the purpose of collecting evidence and with the assistance and guidance of experts. So for example, this fact-finding, especially if they're talking about massacres and other atrocities, they will be including among them a forensic anthropologist or a forensic investigator who will look at material evidence like bones and how these bones appear, whether because the way these bones are show, I mean, the bones can show whether the instruments being used for murder or for the killing would be considered as like blunt instruments or sharp instruments. All those things will be uh, surfaced in the investigation of a forensic a criminologist or an anthropologist who's trained in forensic science. So the two others are the use of oral history and memory initiatives. And this is very challenging, especially for the youth, because the sources and the gatekeepers of oral history are no longer there. Some of them are still available, but they are slowly going towards the final flight of their lives. Or for example, in my case, I'm already considered as in the pre-departure area of my life because I'm already a senior citizen. So I need to double up my efforts to share what I know with the youth, because anytime I will have my final flight soon. So through oral history, meaning things that are handed down from generation to generation, and memory initiatives, meaning collecting the stories from the old generation, the older generation, preserving and protecting the memory, making sure that there is no revision or distortion of these historical facts. For example, there is a move to discredit the Palimbang massacre, for example. Some people are trying to say that the Palimbang massacre did not happen. This happened in 1974, where so many, more than 1,000 Bangsamoro, especially Maguindanao, were killed. But a lot of revisionists, we call them, would like to show that this never happened. And we want to make sure the oral history initiatives and memory initiatives want to make sure that these historical events will not be forgotten and will be part of the narrative, especially of an oppressed and discriminated people like the Bangsamoro. And in the documentation and archives, this is also one of the most challenging, because some documents are put on paper, and as you know, paper can be easily destroyed by not only by fire but also by insects, by termites. And when I was with Mindanao Cross in the 1990s, that was my problem, because the issues from 1948, when the Mindanao Cross started, they're no longer, they're flimsy. They have become like, because they are eaten up by termites. And so we decided to have it digitized. Now you can access the old copies of Mindanao Cross to a digital format through microfiche at the Ateneo de Manila. It's in the Ateneo de Manila because at that time, there were no facilities for digitizing those materials. It's very different when you don't have a digitized version, because all these, in fact, even Xerox copies can be erased in the future. So you can't preserve these types of things except if you do the digitizing of this data. Okay, so in the next pillar, which is the right to justice, it's the right of justice is everyone's right, but it's also the right of those who have been aggrieved, especially the survivors of victims of massacres, to file appropriate cases in court. However, as I said, for massive atrocities like massacres, it would be the courts of law at present would be insufficient to be able to give justice to this, so that I'm not sure if you're familiar, from 2013 to 2018, there was a law that was called the Human Rights Victims Claims Board, which gave out reparation pay for more than 1,000 claimants for those who have been victimized during martial law, victims of massacre, torture. Of course, hindi na sila buhay. They are no longer alive na, but the survivors, they're survivors. So these things can be done, but unfortunately, that law ended up in 2018. So you can also talk about alternative dispute mechanisms, which are being used in more traditional societies. And now we have access to international and domestic hybrid courts. For example, internationally, we have the International Criminal Court, which is now trying to put together a case against the president for extrajudicial killings, and the newly appointed ICC chief prosecutor is British lawyer Karim Khan. He is replacing Fatsuda Betu, who just finished her term, and Karim's predecessor already established that there is enough reason for the ICC to hold a full-length investigation on the claimants of more than 6,000 cases of extrajudicial killings. Then we have witness protection programs, which is usually used by the state in order to make witnesses feel safe for whistleblowing or for divulging or squealing on some atrocities in the past. Then we have, of course, monitoring of trials. Then we talk about reparation as an obligation of a wrongdoing party to redress the damage caused to the injured party. And under international law, any act of reparation must always wipe out all the consequences of the illegal act and reestablish the situation, which is before the thing that happened, that in all probability have existed if that act had not been committed. For example, if a family lost their grocery store as a result of bombing, then the state should recompense them with whatever was their declared value of that grocery store before the bombing took place. And that is what we call compensation. So reparations is about providing benefits directly to victims and their families. That was what happened under the Human Rights Victims Claims Board law from 2013 to 2018. However, there are other forms of reparation. That the payment is compensation is one. Another form is rehabilitation. For example, government will put up new schools, new madaris, new mosques in Marawi, in the place where the bombing took place. Restoration of the whole place as if it never happened, you know. However, there is also a very simple and less expensive form of reparation called symbolic. For example, public apologies and other symbolic acts of, you know, like community work for some criminals, for those who have committed violations against the community. They can do community work. And symbolic, especially public apologies, is the most desired one. For example, I'm talking about, these are Korean comfort women. They held a rally when former Prime Minister Abe was the incumbent Prime Minister in Japan. They wanted to demand that the Japanese government issue a public apology on the use of Korean women as sex slaves during the Second World War. But Abe, in his usual proud stance, said, "We have given you money we don't need to apologize anymore. So at that time, apology did not happen, even if there was payment. But this one stands out as one of the most outstanding examples of how a current chancellor of Germany at the time, Willy Brandt, knelt before the tombs of a group of soldiers who were killed in Warsaw, Poland during the Nazi era. This was a surprise move. His bodyguards and the ones who are protecting him never thought that he would do it, but he immediately had an instant decision to genuflect and kneel before and say a prayer to them and ask forgiveness. Another one is, if you have seen the documentary of the Commission on Human Rights on the Palimbang massacre, there was a military officer who was there who said, in behalf of the people who wear the same uniform I am wearing, I would say sorry for all that we have done. But of course, that is insufficient because he's only a minor military officer. You need to have the president of the Philippines to do the apology. Okay, so what are we talking about when we say transitional justice as a framework for lawmaking in the BARM? We are looking at 4 major issues when we talk about transitional justice and how to deal with them. One is to look at the legitimate grievances of the Bangsamoro. For a long while, the Bangsamoro has remained in the periphery of the Philippine historical narrative. There is no course on Bangsamoro history offered to universities in the National Capital Region, and that is the consequence of that is the lack of knowledge and appreciation of the distinctiveness of the Bangsamoro identity. To correct historical injustice among the peoples in the region, among the historical injustices are the fact that many places in Mindanao are named after the conquerors rather than after Bangsamoro or Mindanao heroes. For example, Magallanes Street. Who is Magallanes? Magallanes is the Spanish version of Ferdinand Magellan. There is a plaza in Zamboanga City called Plaza Pershing. And who was General Pershing? He was the one who commanded a group of American soldiers to massacre more than 1,000 Tausug in Budaho in 1913. So in Cotabato itself, you have the Camp General Gonzalo Sionco, which sits right across the airport. Gonzalo Sionco was the commander of the then Sultan Kudarat military leadership to order the massacre in Palimbang, the bombing of some people, some barangays there. So now he is honored. His name is immortalized as the name of a camp. And many streets in Cotabato, Corcuera, the only local names maybe would be Makakua Street and Sinswat Avenue. That's Georgiani's great grandfather maybe. So, but all throughout Mindanao, you see all these things. Massive human rights abuses, not only in the past, but even in the present. And the most emblematic of which is the Marawi siege. And then there is this very deep issue of marginalization through land dispossession. In our report for transitional justice, you will see details of how lands were grabbed from the indigenous peoples and from the Bangsamoro through legal means, but legal does not necessarily mean just or fair. And then we look at the present now. And these are challenges for the youth, for you to develop an agenda on. For example, transitional justice, one of the pillars is to ensure that past atrocities will not recur in the present and in the future. However, if past atrocities have not been addressed, the culture of impunity remains unabated. Several cases of human rights abuses are still unaddressed and continue to occur. For example, killings of several people in Pulomolok, for example. So far, human rights groups have counted like 80 civilians killed in this EJK killing spree. We have intractable communal conflicts and threats of violent extremism, not yet addressed, because every now and then we hear of reports of communities evacuating because of confrontation between the Bangsamoro Islamic freedom fighters, BIFF, versus the Philippine government. Now, because of the pandemic, we have a massive health crisis. A lot of people get COVID-19, and many of them have died, and even including people who are prominent individuals. Aside from that, especially for the youth, the learning crisis has in fact been exacerbated because there are more youth now not interested to go to school because of the lack of internet connection, the lack of stable connection. And in the BARM, if you use your parents as the learning facilitators, some parents are illiterate. So then the modules that are distributed are in English or in Tagalog. So how are they able to teach their children? So there's really a learning crisis. I've been part of a program called Pathways for Peace, Education for Peace in Mindanao, and we're seeing how the pandemic has impacted on learning outcomes in the region. It used to be that the learning outcomes were very, very bad already before the pandemic. Now it has gone from bad to worse because of the lack of like facilities for distance learning, facilities for online and other kinds of alternative teaching modes for students not able to connect with internet, or students in geographically isolated regions. The other challenge is who will create a TJ mechanism? Is it the parliament or the national government? And I think it's also a question that the BTA as a transition authority are already racking their brains how to deal with this, because some argument goes that why will the Bangsamoro create a transitional justice mechanism when it is the Bangsamoro who are the victims in the atrocities? It should be the national government then. So there is the recommendation to create a national transitional justice board. Okay. Another challenge are, some of the other challenges include reparations. Who is responsible and accountable, because there's no truth commission yet? And do we have enough money for a rationalized reparations program? It will be costing a lot. For example, even in the Marawi siege, the compensation bill is insufficient because it could be it could pave the way for unequal distribution and unfair distribution of compensation. For example, one of the latest complaints of the IDPs in Marawi is the fact that the city government of Marawi has sold the iron, yung mga bakal na, which are part of the destroyed houses, the debris. They have sold the debris to the amount of almost 1 million pesos. A question now, how are you? The people in Marawi complained, and the mayor said, don't worry, it will be a trust fund for all of you. But how will you distribute the money? What is the basis for saying that you will give 10,000 to this family if the others have big houses and therefore had huge steel bars or concrete parts of the debris that have been flattened because of government action? So the fourth one, I have already said this. The next is, should the Truth Commission start a process of demanding for accountability? And should this be created through an executive order or a legislation? If it is an executive order, it's not as strong as a law, because an executive order can always be rescinded by the next president. So we are proposing for a law, a legal instrument. Then other challenges have to deal with the security sector reforms. For example, this is the current question because of the abuses of police and other paramilitaries who are accused of killing innocent civilians in the violent drug war. So crimes associated with illegal or shadow economies in the region, and that's related to that. Of course, we are aware of the proliferation of extremist ideologies and recruitment among disgruntled youth, and this is the threat in Marawi because people are disgruntled since nothing has been done for them to return to their place of origin and for them to be allowed to build their own houses. So it's a very attractive magnet for disgruntled youth if they're being offered money for joining nefarious activities of extremist groups. The basic question during the time of the pandemic is what Nikki De La Rosa, a colleague of mine before, calls the politics of the belly, meaning that those daily workers are not able to earn their keep because of the lockdowns and other health protocols. So when it is the belly that is making noise, it's hard for people not to act, and sometimes they act violently or they act rashly. Lastly, so what are the prospects for you to develop your agenda? I think because you are all articulate, by articulate, you are all expressive of your ideas and your ideals. Not yung bagong meaning ng articulate na maarte na makulit pa. So being articulate in what you want to happen in the future. So I'm looking at you because you're all techno savvy to maximize that savviness to advocate towards the creation of a National Transitional Justice and Reconciliation Board that will create mechanisms like the Truth Commission, for example. You can do that through, as I said, through social media, through the organization of webinars like this, more webinars like this, information drives, gathering of evidence through, maybe you can start with a simple listening process of communities affected heavily by armed conflict, researches into past human rights violations and land dispossession still needed until now. Community organizing to increase public awareness of the need to come up with TJ mechanisms. And lastly, sustained advocacy for meaningful institutional reforms. And that does not only concern reforms in governance. There have been many reforms instituted in government, but the reforms have so far not transformed governance. It's still the same. It's led by different people, but the whole systematic corruption, the whole patronage politics, are all these initiatives that have been done by previous politicians have been there before, like using community initiatives for political gains. In fact, I've seen a lot of community pantries being politicized because there are tarpaulins. This pantry is donated by so and so, blank 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 for president movement. So what kind of you're using that supposed to be altruism coming from the community as a vehicle for promoting your political agenda. So we need to have reforms that make it impossible or even lessen the possibility of using platforms like this to promote a personal political agenda. But the most meaningful reform should be in the security sector, because these are people who are holding firearms and they can do a lot because they are feeling powerful with their firearms. All agencies should have a set of reforms that will ensure that past atrocities and massive violations of human rights will not recur in the present and in the future, and that societies will move towards healing and reconciliation of everybody. And one of the things that you can do is to help in the propagation of information about candidates who are implicated in massive violations of human rights, so that they will not be able to become government officials in the future. I think that's where I end so far. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Guillaume. Please reserve your questions for Professor Guillaume later on after all the speakers have been given their time to speak. So for now, let us proceed to our second speaker, Sir Kenny Angon.
Hello po, good afternoon. Assalamualaikum. Maayong hapon katong tanan. Daghang kayong salamat. Thank you very much po, syukran to our organizers for this activity, for this opportunity to be the fact now you're given a chance to share the virtual stage with our very own Professor Rufa Giam is already a humbling experience. I'm actually very happy. Sa no palang preliminaries pa lang, we're actually very much thankful for the opportunity to be with her, no, as one of the speakers this afternoon. So muli po, maraming salamat to all of the organizers of this activity. As mentioned by our host earlier, ako po si Kenny Lloyd Lucina Angon. I am the Deputy Executive Director ng Alcalam Institute of the Ateneo de Davao University. The Alcalam Institute po is the Peace Institute of the university, and it is only in Ateneo de Davao that we have the Alcalam Institute. But we are in consortium with other Ateneo Mindanao campuses, which are in Ateneo Zamboanga and Xavier University. Other than that, I also serve as the board chairperson of an NGO called the Mindanaoan Youth Development Center Incorporated. Earlier, we have heard a lot, mostly focused on transitional justice from our Professor Fagyam, but allow me to share that is a very significant topic, and there's something that we really have to act on as young people to encourage our Bangsamoro government to really find ways to be able to bridge the national government towards the victims of this injustices, that you'll be able to really push for the appropriate actions for this purpose. But more than that, it's important to highlight that in this presentation, I decided to divide the topic into three parts. The first part is what has been done, no? In line with the Bangsamoro session, what has been done in ensuring the youth participation in the Bangsamoro session. Second is in my as Alcalam and as a young leader from Mindanao, what can we say about what has been done already for the Bangsamoro youth, and finally what else can be done or what else needs to be done for us to be able to move forward, as well as contribute in the development of our young people and contribute to the sustainable peace and development in the Bangsamoro region. So three parts po. So what has been done? It's important to highlight that in the Bangsamoro session is part and parcel of the Bangsamoro peace process, and one of the significant milestones of the Bangsamoro peace process is the signing of the Bangsamoro Organic Law, more known as the BOL, or ang complete name mas ano po siya sa Republic Act 11054, or the Organic Law of the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao, or mas kilala siya biang BOL. It was signed by the President Duterte on July 26, but there was a ceremonial signing on August 6. But let's also highlight that the beginning of the discussions on the Bangsamoro peace process was started by our late President Benigno Aquino. No? So it's important to highlight po na malaki din po ang kontribusyon ng ating pong yumaong mahal na Pangulong Pinoy sa Bangsamoro peace process. More than ay maliban po sa ating pong Presidente Duterte sa ngayon. After po to ratify the law, it's important to take to that there was a plebiscite conducted on January 21 and February 6, and majority of the Bangsamoro people voted for yes to the ratification of the Republic Act 11054. In fact, there are new geographical components of the region, which is Cotabato City and the 63 barangays of North Cotabato. So from the Republic Act 6074, which established the Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao, now we already have the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao, or the BARM, to the Republic Act 11054. In the said law, it is clearly stated that a part of the composition that the Bangsamoro government will have its BTA, or the Bangsamoro government will have its 8-member parliament, and unless this number or the 80 will be increased by the Congress by amendment of the law. And based on the Article 7, Section 7 of the said Republic Act 11054, it also clearly states there what are the classifications and allocations for these 80-member parliament. And item C of Section 7 states there that at least 10% of the total seats of or members of the parliament should be from this sectoral representatives, and that includes the youth. To be more specific, 2 reserved seats po for non-Moro, indigenous peoples, and settler communities, while the women, the youth, the traditional leaders, and the ulama shall have 1 sectoral seat, provided that the reserved seats and sectoral representatives shall be no case be less than 8 seats. And the manner or process of the election for the reserved seats will be identified by the parliament through appropriate legislations. So klaro po yun, no, na nakalagay po sa Republic Act 11054 that there should be youth representation in the Bangsamoro government through a seat in the Bangsamoro parliament. More than that, it's also important to highlight that one of the things that has been done is that the Bangsamoro parliament was able to enact Bangsamoro Autonomy Act number 10, which establishes the Bangsamoro Youth Commission and provides and guides us on what are and defines the powers, functions, and responsibilities of and appropriating funds thereof of the of the Bangsamoro Youth Commission. Through Bangsamoro Act number 10, we now have the Bangsamoro Youth Commission, and it is also clear that in the said law in the Bangsamoro region, what is the composition of the Bangsamoro Youth Commission, or the BYC. It states there that there should be 1 chairperson and 4 regular commissioners representing the major political subdivisions of the region. And it's also important to highlight the lower part, that there should be 2 ex-officio commissioners from the non-Moro indigenous peoples and settler communities. For this purpose, the respective heads of the Ministry of the MIPA, or the Indigenous Peoples Affairs, and the Office of Settler Communities, which still needs to be established, shall designate the ex-officio commissioner for their offices. It's important to highlight that even in the composition of the Bangsamoro Youth Commission, it also promotes inclusivity. Question is, where does the new geographical areas come in? As you can see at item A of Section 10 composition, that the first commissioner there is from representing Maguindanao, including Cotabato City and the 63 barangays. So is the BOIC working now? Of course, yes, no. And in fact, we have been collaborating with the Bangsamoro Youth Commission in the implementation of our various programs and projects. Its chairperson is Dr. Marjani Mimbantas Makasalong, who is also serving as the commissioner for Lanao, the Sur, and also the chairperson of the commission. For Maguindanao, Cotabato City, and the 63 barangays of North Cotabato is Commissioner Dunding. For Tawi-Tawi is Commissioner Samraji. For Basilan, Commissioner Tanjil. And for Sulu is Commissioner Sally. these are the ones who are already put in place, are already in the commission. So it only means that there are not yet commissioners for the indigenous peoples as well as the settler communities. For settler communities, there's still an office to be established. For MIPA, well, it is clearly stated in the organic law that there should be an indigenous people's office, but it still needs an enabling law in the Bangsamoro Parliament. While there are already resolutions and proposed bill on establishing these two offices, they are still yet to undergo appropriate legislative process. As mentioned, these 5 commissioners of the Bangsamoro Youth Commission already took their oath during the first youth coordinating council meeting conducted in the Bangsamoro Government Center within this year. And one of the milestones that we have conducted in this transition is to develop the Bangsamoro Youth Transition Priority Agenda. Because our topic focuses on what are the the youth development agenda. And it's important to highlight that our Bangsamoro Youth Commission, with the help of its stakeholders, primarily the different youth leaders, who work together as the technical working group in the development of the BYTPA, or the Bangsamoro Youth Transition Priority Agenda, which covers 2020 to 2022, which is primarily the main transition period as stipulated in the Bangsamoro Organic Law. Not unless it will be extended as proposed right now in the Congress and in the Senate. So in the BYTPA, it is important to highlight that while the Philippines has the Philippine Youth Development Plan, which is the reference of the priority agenda of the national government, being focused more on the National Youth Commission, it's important to highlight that the need for creating a more specific, more localized youth agenda in the Bangsamoro region is important because of the different realities in the ground. It's important to highlight that there are a lot of realities as well as context that must be considered. That's why the Bangsamoro Youth Commission has really decided to work on this. But there are a lot of challenges that they encountered along the way when they were establishing the Bangsamoro Youth Commission. If you will be able to read this BYTPA, it is actually accessible already online. You can look for the website of the National Youth Commission, the Bangsamoro Youth Commission, and it is available there for your access. Amongst the challenges that they enumerated are, number one, it was a challenge of data. It's important to take note that in the development of the priority agenda, just like other priority plans, it's important that there should be a baseline data. But when they tried to gather data about the different demographics, about different information about the youth in different sectors, unfortunately, they had limited information that they will be able to gather, mostly from the Statistics Authority. More on the age division, more on the education division, but more than that, they were unable to gather this data. That's why they had difficulty on developing the priority agenda. Second, it's also important to highlight that the coverage of this one is during the transition, and it wouldn't be even for other plans. It's usually at least 5 or 10-year plan, but because they only have 3-year transition, that was also the consideration of the Bangsamoro Youth Commission, the technical working group that developed the BYTPA. So on the concern of the development the development of this priority agenda, it's important to highlight that they were able to identify 5 key priority areas. The health, which is of course it's important, especially nowadays that we're encountering the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as on the access for the protection through universal health care, and to promote youth health and well-being, to reduce their sexual and reproductive health risk and non-sexual risk taking behaviors. Second is important also is the education, which is more on the accessible, quality, and relevant formal and non-formal education, which I will be also highlighting later on. On peace building and security, which is important to highlight, as mentioned earlier by Professor Rufagyam, na until the present, and even there are narratives and documentations that the pandemic has actually contributed to the furtherance and the continuity of recruitment or radicalizations for our VE groups. Governance, it's important to highlight the role of our young leaders in the government right now, especially the SK officials and the young legislators. And of course, active citizenship. So these are still banked on the Philippine Youth Development Plan. But instead of 9 centers, the Bangsamoro Youth Development Priority Agenda only focuses into 5. So yun po ang nagawa. Those are the things that have been done by the government. It's important to highlight and recognize that the Bangsamoro government, especially through the Bangsamoro Youth Commission, has tried its best to be able to develop an agenda. At the same time, this considered this one as the foundation on the implementation of the different initiatives, programs, projects, and activities. So the question is, what can we say about this priority agenda? No, it's important to highlight that, as mentioned earlier, the ones that has been prioritized in the BYTPA are only 5 of the 9. So health was there, education was there, but there was no economic empowerment. It's important to highlight that, especially nowadays, the most important thing right now for intervention is sustainability, and one of which is on integration of economic empowerment, such as in employability and entrepreneurship. Social inclusion and equity was also unfortunately not included there, but as during the discussions, they say it's interrelated to the other priority agenda. It's important to highlight that there are also different social inclusion and equity challenges that we're encountering in the area, especially some challenges on being raised by our non-Moro indigenous peoples communities, as well as our PWDs and all other subsectors of the youth. Peace building was there and security. Governance was there. Active citizenship was also there, but the environment wasn't there. It's important to take note that the Bangsamoro region has a lot of environmental resources. At the same time, that it is very high potential on different factors or different possibilities for ecotourism as well. And finally, on global mobility, which is also important to highlight because there are a lot of Bangsamoro young leaders who have been given the opportunities to be sent to other countries at a time when there was no pandemic. For example, in my case, I was given a chance to be recommended for a JICA-funded project where I was sent in JICA, by JICA to Hiroshima, Japan, together with other Bangsamoro youth leaders, and we were given a chance to know more about what Japan has done, and at the same time share what we can do, what we have done here in the Philippines, at the same time how it can be integrated all together to develop the Bangsamoro government. It's also important to highlight that one of the things that we have encountered right now is the pandemic that we're encountering. That even that the reality is that we are diverse. The reality is also that the COVID-19 pandemic does not look at the diversity. It affects everybody. Whatever is your race, whatever is your religion, whatever is your state of socioeconomic status, everyone can be affected by this pandemic. And that is why it's important to take note that there are a lot of things yet to be done. No? But we don't put the pressure only on the government. Rather, it is important to highlight that there are a lot of things that can be done, not just by the government, but all other sectors such as the youth and all other sectors such as the academe, the civil society organizations, the private sector, and others. For the environment, I'll be showing to you a short clips. I'm not sure if some of you were able to go here, maybe in the maybe it's also your first time to see an actual captured video of this place. And maybe some of you don't even know where this is. This is the last frontier of the Bangsamoro, the Liguasan Marsh. It's important to highlight that the Liguasan Marsh is a significant natural resource of the Bangsamoro government. And yet, it was also, unfortunately, clearly stated by our president himself. And also, there were statements of the possibility of exploitation of whatever is available in this natural resource. There are researches and studies of the presence of natural gas and oil, and there have been videos shown on YouTube and in social media about the potential of this area. But again, it is a natural resource. And more than that, it's important to highlight that the Republic Act 11054 has highlighted ecological balance, and it's important to make sure that the sustainability of the Liguasan Marsh. That is why Alcalam Institute has worked together with the Netherlands Embassy in implementing the Project Liguasan, wherein we engage our young people to promote the sustainability of the Liguasan Marsh, and at the same time also important to highlight promote environmental justice and governance. And these are our collaborators in this project, the Netherlands Embassy, headed by Her Excellency Ambassador Saskia Delang. I will no longer show you the video of Azul, but through the project Ligwasan, you were able to establish a movement called Azul, which means Advocates for Sustainable Ligwasan. It is a network of young leaders from different parts of Mindanao, mostly in the Bangsamoro region, and we were able to establish 4 chapters of the Advocates for Sustainable Ligwasan, one in Cotabato City, one is in DOS, which includes other neighbor areas, that's what we call DOS Plus chapter, Pagalungan Plus chapter, which includes even areas of North Cotabato, and the GSKP Plus, which also includes some areas of South Cotabato, which are covering the areas of the Ligwasan Marsh, including its exit areas. The movement has taken its oath to continue its campaign called hashtag Pag-usapan, Ligwasan Pag-usapan. It's important to highlight that we push our Bangsamoro government to continue discussing on what are potential areas that we can work on. And we're happy to say that one of the members of the parliament, MP Ali, has filed a bill in the Bangsamoro parliament on pushing for creation of a management commission. And we in the Alcalam Institute, together with our advocates for sustainable Ligwasan, are with him and with the rest of the advocates pushing for ensuring the sustainability of the Ligwasan Marsh, and that the youth can be of a big part on how to do that. And it's important to push also that a part of the Ligwasan Marsh should be declared as a protected area as a way to sustain it. So these are just photos of us when we were given an opportunity to be there with the help and in partnership with the government, the local government unit of General Escape and Datun, a municipality in Maguindanao. And inshallah, this last quarter of the year, we'll be working together with them in another project working on and promoting renewable energy and engaging our young people to promote the same. For economic empowerment, we have a project called Project Prime. Now it has evolved to Project Prime Champs. Primarily, it's socio-economic intervention to fight extremism, and we believe that it's important to highlight that it's such as our SMEs and local organizations are affected by the pandemic, but also our vulnerable communities, including our young people. That is why we are now working on the implementation of our Project Prime Champs. This is a project funded by the New Zealand Embassy, promoting social enterprise development as well as Islamic finance to our young people. We are working with 5 small and medium enterprises in Cotabato City and Maguindanao, and they were trained through our Project Prime last year. And based on their training, they were able to develop their social enterprise plans, and they were able to provide them with appropriate assistance. Now in this project, it's their time to give back to their community by providing and supporting us in training our young Mindanao, especially the Cotabateños and Maguindanaoans, on how they can also start up their own small and medium enterprises, as well as explore how can they integrate Islamic finance. That is for economic empowerment. Again, we're thankful with the New Zealand Embassy headed by Ambassador Peter Kerr for supporting us in this project. More than that, we're also trying to promote the importance of its social enterprise, because our partners here are introducing entrepreneurship, which has advocacy component, including the protection and promotion or preservation of our culture and tradition, at the same time also on environmental protection. For peace building and security, as shared earlier by Professor Yusuf Rufagyam, and that's also confirmed by our different documentations of our initiatives all throughout Mindanao, even reaching as far as the island provinces, there's still continuous radicalization and recruitment. Unfortunately, amongst those who are really easily recruited are our young people. And it's important to highlight that Alcalam Institute's milestone, one of our significant milestones also is the development and establishment of the Salam movement. And also now we already have our Salam Corps Peace Champions, more or less 100 young peace champions all throughout Mindanao, preventing violent extremism. We have here Sir Exxon working with us also in all of its efforts. We have George, one of our reactors here, is also a product of the Salam movement. And we believe in the Salam movement and Alcalam that there should be 3 things you have to consider in preventing violent extremism. It's important to highlight the sense of identity, the sense of belongingness, and the sense of purpose. We have to provide opportunities for young people to be proud of who they are, to be proud as Bangsamoro youth, to be proud as Mindanaoan youth, to be proud as Nan-Moro, as Moro, Mindanaoan youth. And it's important to provide them a platform wherein they can be with their fellow young people to look at the possibilities on how they can contribute in addressing their own local challenges in their area. And through our project right now called Salam Corps Across Borders and Cultures, supported by our partners from Germany, GIZ, PUCAP, and inshallah this coming month of July onwards is with the GIZ CPS. We'll be working together in our Key Peace project, mostly for our young people here in Mindanao. It's still a movement established through our father Joel Tabora, our university president, and it started with Althea Ismael, now a law school student, and now we are working with Fatima Star Lamalan heading the team, and they were able to go around different parts of Mindanao as far as Tawi-Tawi to have conversations with our young people and be able to contribute in trying to engage our young people in preventing violent extremism. For education, it's important to highlight that the Bangsamoro government has already passed the Bangsamoro Education Code as one of the priority codes, and it's you like to highlight to you some of the important provisions of this act, providing for the establishment of the maintenance and support of a complete and integrated system of quality education. That includes number one, highlighting that Madaris education systems is also important. No, maliban sa MBHTE, basic education, higher education, and technical education, it's also clear there that Madaris education is very much highlighted, that there should be appropriate curriculum structure and content for madrasa, and that there is appropriate subsidy to be provided with our madrasa, and that we are encouraged that the Bangsamoro government is encouraging the support of the different stakeholders to support our madrasa. Because the reality is, while it is not there are isolated cases, but among one of the vulnerable communities to recruitment are our Madaris institutions. But through our project called Home Barm, working with the MVP, we're able to engage Madaris volunteer program in working with our different stakeholders. We're happy to say that we're working with different communities. We have 28 partner Madaris institutions all throughout Mindanao as far as Tawi-Tawi. With our beneficiaries, these are actually just testimonies of our beneficiaries sharing how the project was able to contribute in the development of their Madaris and their different stakeholders. So these are just testimonies. Let's just skip this one. And even the Director General of the Bureau of Madaris Education in the BARM has recognized that this project is very much timely, because one of the most affected sectors of the pandemic right now are our Madaris institutions. Finally, it's important to highlight that we have the power of the social media, and it is very influential to our young people. We have a lot of platforms that can be maximized, whichever it is, as long as it's the facts, that you provide the facts and provide it for positive messaging. Finally, we work together in investing more on creative methods and approaches. We try to highlight positive counter narratives. We also capacitate more of our young people in other sectors, especially on PVE, and to mobilize them towards policies. And that's why most of our project has policy recommendation component. And finally, monitor them and evaluate appropriately to address some challenges and gaps. Shukran po. Maraming salamat. Assalamualaikum.
Thank you so much, Sir Kenny Angon. Now, we will immediately proceed to our first reactor for this afternoon, Ms. Cal Bacasal.
Thank you, Steffi. Thank you, Ian and Gwen. All right, so Ian is assisting me for my PowerPoint. I cannot beat the 66 pages report of Kuya Kenny, but if I can ask Ian to just roll out 3 points, because I will be delivering 3 points now. All right. So first of all, good afternoon, everyone. I am very privileged to be here with you today in this digital stage, and especially honored to be a reactor and to share this moment with esteemed resource persons such as Professor Bula herself, who is also very much popular among peace builders here in Mindanao, and civil societies and academia, of course, for her knowledge and contribution in Mindanao. Of course, Kuya Kenny, I call him Kuya. He's in Alcalam right now, and also my partner in many of the activities that we've organized in the past. And of course, Georgiani, my dear colleague, friend. I have to mention friend because Georgiani would later react again and call me a cold person for referring to him as a colleague and not a friend. But really, these people are no stranger to me, no? They're no stranger to me. In fact, we've been there together since we were in our university days. And until now, I can see, and I'm really happy to see that they're still doing the good side of history and still fighting the good fight as it goes. Of course, Ian Salvania is not a stranger also, our lead research director who extended the invitation today. Gusto niya talagang dagdagan ang mga tatrabahuin ko. So, thank you, Bess. But you see, I met them during university days. George was more popular back then, but that's beside the point. Back then, we were organizing school level activities, like Kuya Kenny back then was already teaching while I was still a student, and he was already running his outside organization. We continued to join causes and organizations, expanding our affiliations. And I could really say that the school has been our training ground. And I'm very happy to see friends who have continued to expand their causes that they've worked with from the start. So this is not me who is going to talk about the history of our friendship, no? But if you talk about youth participation or proportionate youth participation, it is broad, but that is one example, perhaps. That is the closest and most personal example I could draw. So right now, I will be sharing 3 points. Ayun. So first is youth platform. One has to have a channel, a platform. So that is provided by those who are able to bring capacity. Young or old, learning doesn't stop. And so we recognize the importance of initiatives such as capacity building and youth-led programs and activities such as this one. So Kuya Kenny also mentioned earlier very concrete examples and concrete reports of what they're doing now in the BARM in partnership also with the Bangsamoro Youth Commission. So that's really a lot there, that those are very much good examples of a youth platform, a channel. So one has to have a channel. And of course, governments therefore should support these initiatives from grassroots level going up, bringing together all stakeholders, and of course channeling support in all means, including technical, financial, etc. And take note, I mentioned grassroots because programs and channels for conversation should be available to as many young people as possible, and not just to select groups or those who are already, fulfilling leadership roles themselves. No, so um, if I were, I would just like to share. No, like one time we went, Ian and we went to Marawi recently, and we had a bit of a chat with a good friend. He's also a leader from the ground mismo, and of course we were talking about how can we liven up youth participation? How can we look into ways where our activities can be more sustainable, etc. We started a lot of groups. No, not a lot of groups. We have groups and youth group affiliation, ika nga. But then we wanted to be more sustainable, and we don't want to let our organizations just die out, no. So the sustainability there is the question. So how can we be more lively? How can we be more inclusive and sustainable? So, but one thing that we have to learn from that friend is that he saw firsthand also. We saw that it's important to include the grassroots. It's important na hindi lang yung mga leader na kung meron ngayon sa para lang, yun lang yung magbe-benefit sa lahat ng capacity training. So as much as possible, we wanted to expand. We wanted everybody to have a channel and a platform, and we can utilize all these organizations that are already existing. So we saw that if you give them a platform to speak, that will really create a ripple effect. So of course, the purpose is to equip the young people in the near future where they will feel the roles in the community and in the government. So kasabi ka talaga na I am ready for mature roles in the government, in nation building in the BARM. I will not be a menace, but an asset to my community. And that is the role. Status is another thing. It's just a relative social position within the group. But the role, the young people have a role to fulfill now and later. So diba, if you equip them now, give them the platform, then they will effectively fulfill those roles that we're creating now, etc. So it is when the youth are capacitated further that they can effectively assert their needs and ideas. So I would like to build upon the UN Youth and 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. I've been trying to look for the reports, current reports though, but I saw this one and dumiretso kagad sa conclusion. So, but then I will draw from the conclusion, and that line reads, when coupled with existing efforts to advance youth policy development and implementation, both through targeted youth policies and mainstreaming of youth issues, the new development landscape offers innumerable opportunities for young people to thrive. And the same is true for localized efforts. So earlier mentioned by Kuya Kenny, yun nga, the Bangsamoro Youth Transition Priority Agenda, for example. And for these efforts to be successful, much more is needed now in terms of political commitment, financing, etc., and other targeted interventions in support of the youth. So in our organization as IID, so I'm also representing IID now, and also as a youth leader myself, I also started from National Youth Commission and of course from Ateneo. In our organization now in IID, that is also where we try to come in. We try to observe more representation and inclusion of youth in our programs, no. So as an advocacy and solidarity and policy organization promoting solidarity, people to people internationalism and South-South solidarity. So everybody has to be, no one should be left behind. So we has to be inclusive. So give the young people a platform and they will thrive. And with proper training, ground and capacity building to inspire, I could see a really very powerful youth movement in Bangsamoro in the Philippines. So next point is well-transition. I'd say well-founded transition. So who are the young people, by the way? Sino ba yung mga matatawag na youth pa ngayon? So the United Nations General Assembly, they consider the youth, thank you, Patse, they consider the youth to be from the age 15 to 24 years old. That's according to the UN definition. And some of the Commonwealth nations now, youth is from 15 to 29 years old. In the Philippines, we have another definition. So it defined that the Filipino youth is those with ages 15 to 30. So ikaw, kung 15 to 24 ka, according to the UN, hindi ka na youth. Pero kung 15 to 30 ka, according to Philippines, youth ka pa. So na-happy ako like, oh my gosh, youth pa ako according to Philippines. Thank you, Philippines. But according to UN, 15 to 24, hindi na ako youth. So okay lang. But anyway, enough of my age. But really, yeah, so that definition, by the way, the Filipino youth as those with ages 15 to 30, that was taken from the Youth in Nation Building Act or Republic Act 8044. It was enacted in 1995 and of course led to the establishment of the National Youth Commission and the National Comprehensive and Coordinated Program on Youth Development. So, excuse me. All right, so in National Youth Commission, when I was there, I support you. I support NYC, of course. We always say that Philippines is a youth nation. So I'm trying to find the demographic latest report on the population, but the closest that I could find and the quickest is according to the report I got from the UNFPA. It says here that the Philippines today has the largest generation of young people in history. So 30 million young people between the ages 10 to 24 account for 28% of the Philippine population. So 28%, 30 million young people. But that's only 10 to 24 of ages. How about those young children and those from 25 to 30, no? So okay, so 28%, that's almost half, but that's a UN definition. What else? In 2010, This is from the report of UNICEF. In 2010, there are about 36 million children aged 0 to 17 years old in the population, and that comprises 39.7% of the total population. So if you combine children population, youth population, we could say that, more than half of the Philippine population is a young population. We are a youth nation, no? Therefore, it's important that we invest in our young people. Therefore, yes, it's nice to refer to reports coming from the National Commission as well. So when we say youth, there is the transition phase from childhood to adulthood. So those stages are very much crucial to building one's character and capacity. And so we hope that the young people, all Filipino young people, will have a well-founded and well-supported transitioning in terms of, provisions in education. To read from the reports coming from National NYC at all, like promotion and protection of physical, moral, spiritual, intellectual, and social well-being of the youth. Inculcation in the youth of patriotism, nationalism, other basic desirable values, encouragement of the youth involvement in character building and development of activities for civic efficiency, stewardess for natural resources. Some examples cited already by Kuya Kenny earlier. Mobilization of youth's abilities, talents, skills, and redirecting their creativity, etc. So right now, with all those, we acknowledge how vital it is to be able to provide a lot of opportunities to the youth now, so that they can transition into well-equipped adults. That's how it is. So well-founded transition. And if we weave it all together, platform and well-founded transition. So right now, what do we have right now? What is our current reality? So according to the Senate reports, the Filipino youth today faces a myriad of issues that needs to be addressed at the grassroots level. So there's poverty, there's lack of education, drug or substance abuse, vice, crime, and unemployment are among the many problems that continue to batter them. So siguro ang naisip ko more of yung first and second points is more of a preventive measures. But if we go back again to the presentation also of Professor Bula, all right, she perfectly explained later, the TJ framework, the transitional justice and dealing with the past framework. No? She said that transitional justice is like crossing a bridge from the dark. And I have 5 minutes left, but transitional justice is like crossing a bridge from dark, violent past to a solid future, and delve deeper into knowing more about the truth, having truth commission, fact-finding, etc. So while we try to correct injustices from the past, also we also try to lean forward, provide these better opportunities for our youth, but not forgetting what it is na para what has been done doon sa mga naging naapektuhan sa war. Yung mga batang naging young soldiers, ganon, no? So while we try to prevent those circumstances to happen again, we also try to go back and help the young people who has been through. So ayun, that's one of the beauty of the dealing with the past and the TJ framework also, to just talk about it lightly. And of course, youth and the children are foremost the victims of these atrocities. They are vulnerable and potentially easily riddled with the cycle of violence, and we don't want that to happen. And of course, why do we need to include the youth? So that they can have a better perspective of the problems that affect them. I mean, they do have better perspectives. They can offer something on the table if we ask them. So that's important. And just on the last note, so initiatives on my last note, what has been done so far? Since the scope of the discussion is in the BORM, I mean, Kuya Kenny was also already able to speak so much of what has been done in the BORM, and maybe we can build on that. look into that again. So there's the Bangsamoro Youth Commission. So, but in terms of peace building, of course, we wanted to have more young peace champions to chop violent extremism in my organization. In IID, also we have GSURF project, which is focused on that. And recently, it was difficult to go on field and deliver some of our projects. No, and now I'm talking about some of our projects, but some of our projects have been turned into relief distributions or welfare activities. But recently, with the roll of vaccine and ease of border restrictions, we are slowly able to travel back to our partner communities, and that's really a good thing. And visit our groups to continue our series of dialogue, be there to continue our solidarity missions, and have strategic plannings on how we can proceed with our programs and work closely with CSO, but mindful of the inclusion of the youth. And but um just to end siguro my reaction. I'm reading this one. This is a gift from my good friend kasi I work with her. Malapit na talaga ako matapos. So, Letters to Young Mediator. So, sabi dito, babasahin ko na lang from a poet named Rainer Rilke from Paris. So, what else can I tell you? It seems to me that everything has its proper emphasis. And finally, I want to add just one more bit of advice: to keep growing silently and earnestly through your whole development. You couldn't disturb it any more violently than by looking outside and waiting for outside answers to questions that only your innermost feeling in your quietest hour can perhaps answer. So maraming salamat sa inyong pakikinig. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Kyle, for sharing your reaction on the role of youth in promoting peace. Before we proceed with Georgiani's reaction, I would like to remind or tell everyone that if you have questions, you may input them on the chat so that after Georgiani's turn, we can go over them immediately. So now I'll give the virtual floor to Georgiani for his reaction.
Thank you so much, Steffi. I was fortunate to have worked with all of you in various capacities, the good and the bad, the promising and the not so promising. Steffi was a classmate in the CCO before, the same way that Ian was a neighbor in our student offices. And of course, Kyle was a good friend back in college. Kuya Ken, still and will always be a mentor. And of course, really, it was just an honor to share this platform with Ma'am Rufa, who has championed the Bangsamoro cause for um, quite a number of years already. And my mother actually worked with Ma'am Rufa. I'm not just sure if it was with IOM or with the Mindanao Cross, but I'm really glad that I get this opportunity today. Of course, to the Atenews, I've always been proud to have worked with Atenews in the cause of the Mindanao peace process, and of course with the youth peace mission ever since post Marawi. I am really, this is an inside joke, but I'm really one of the very few people who can traverse one universe to another, and I'm just happy that the YPM and the Atenews have been very kind to me for the past few years. Um, while discussing earlier, I was actually left with fewer thoughts because of the several substantial discussions already made by Professor Rufa, by Sir Kenny, and of course by my good friend Kyle. But today, I just wanted to share a short discussion on the transition period on the eyes of the youth, and where do we stand on the process. Medyo naiba lang yung dynamics lately because just when was that? I think just 2 nights ago, the president and several of the key officials of the cabinet and our representatives from the government of the day in the BARMM and the local political leaders have apparently reached a consensus that will dictate the future of the transition period. But overall, moving towards working in the government is never easy. So much more with a government that has barely um, learned how to walk, because of its infancy and the new phases that it's just entering. So I've been fortunate to work with the leadership of the BARMM in pushing forward for the transition period. Hindi po naging madali, especially if yung pamumuno ng BARMM ay not typical. Pagka pumasok po usually sa gobyerno, alam mo na yung takbo ng mga politiko, yung kanilang mga priorities, at alam mo kung paano yung kanilang dynamics. But with the MILF, hindi po sila mga politiko, nakatuon sila dun sa peace process. So medyo iba yung mga naging priority. And just to give our friends here in today's webinar and those joining us on Facebook, to contextualize, by the end of 2022, the following are expected from our government of the day. First is the obvious enactment of the priority legislations, a fully working and functional bureaucracy, establishing regional and local IGRB, or the Intergovernmental Relations Body, along with the Council of Leaders. The Council of the Leaders is composed of all the governors in the area, city mayors, and the representatives of the legislative districts in the Congress. So that has been enacted already, or at least nasimula na. Nagkita-kita na yung ating Council of Leaders for at least 3 times already since the transition period began. And a clarified basis for the computation of the annual block grant doon sa ating comprehensive agreement on the Bangsamoro and the BOL, may mga areas on negotiation every 5 years kung kakayanin pa ba ng ating internal revenue allotment or internal revenue ng national government yung 5% annually, kailangan bang pataasin, and kailangan na ba siyang alisin. So may ganong areas of nuances pa na kailangang pag-usapan between the parties. Of course, andyan yung ating internal revenue conversation, hindi pa napag-uusapan yung pagpasok ng pera galing sa mga local businesses and how do we send those to the national government while getting at least 25% of those share para sa kanila. And of course, yung pagpapalipat nga ng mga areas and jurisdiction ng ARM to BARM. Pati na rin yung mga gusali and other areas that were turned over during the or after the plebiscite. The opportunities and challenges lang po bilang isang kabataan, I think kailangan maintindihan ng karamihan. Yung most of the provisions ng ating batas mula doon sa BOL ay hindi pa po na i-implement or hindi pa po na-activate. If we look at the history of the ARMM as what the late President Aquino would have described it, it was a failed experiment because most of the key agreements of the 1996 peace agreements were not activated. The powers and authorities of the BOL to the BRMM are not carte blanche. Hindi po siya walk in the park lang. May iba doon na kailangan pa ng enacting laws with the Congress, may iba na kailangan pa ng enacting bills in the Parliament. Without those and without certain IRRs between the national agencies and their regional ministries, hindi po pwedeng galawin yung mga provision na yun. So medyo marami pang challenges. Yung block grant, medyo dito maraming naging bash yung BARM nung kinakampanya pa lang siya sa BOL. Dahil sobrang laki na yung 5%, that's amounting at least 70 billion to an average to the BARMM leadership. Yung problema lang po talaga ngayon dun sa ating block grant, hindi po siya katulad ng allowance ng mga students na ipapadala lang sa inyong ATM, kukunin nyo sa BDO, pwede na. Or dun sa iba, kung masyado kayong tamad mag-ATM, didiretso na lang sa Cebuana or Palawan. Hindi po ganun kadali yung situation natin sa block grant dahil wala pa pong mechanism na nabuo yung ating national government, yung DBM at yung ating regional government sa Treasury Office kung paano ibababa yung pera. Ibig sabihin, pagka na-approve sa ating General Appropriations Act ng Congress every year, yung ating pera sa BARM, hindi siya basta-basta dina-download. Dadaan mo na siya sa Provincial Treasury ng Maguindanao at i-coincide doon sa proposal ng ating Parliament for the General Appropriations Act naman ng Bangsamoro, and then ipapasa sa DBM bago mahuhulog yung pera, and hindi siya one time big time. Hinahati-hati usually ng government 1 billion today, 3 billion next month, etc. So the government of the day is really having difficulties in implementing its programs of healing our communities dahil wala nga pong malinaw na sistema ng pagbaba ng pera. Isa pa yung kakulangan ng mga tao. As of right now, we have at least received 300,000 plus applications for only 5,000 positions. Nandiyan pa yung mga issues ng padrino system, ng kakilala system, naging magulo. So yung staffing concern ng ating regional government, hindi pa po tapos and marami pa tayong government offices na hindi pa na-establish. As mentioned earlier by Kuya Kenny, example nun is yung Settlers Community Office. So wala pa nun. Kailangan pang lagyan ng tao and ng heads. So meaning kulang na kulang yung BARMM ng kanyang workforce. So mahirap din po mag-proceed. And the obvious reason for all the challenges ngayong pandemic is COVID-19. Nung nagkaroon tayo ng lockdown noong March 2020, supposedly magdidiretso-diretso na sana yung cabinet and yung parliament sa enactment ng priority legislations. Pero naputol ng at least 3 to 4 months yung ating sessions sa area because wala nga pong available connectivity for areas like Basilan, Sulu, and Tawi-Tawi na medyo mahinang internet. So nahirapan tayong mag-conduct ng session. Kaya relatively, naurong yung timeline at doon po pumasok yung ating COVID-19 relief efforts. So that was really a huge blow for the transition period na hindi po napaghandaan both ng GPH and ng MILF leadership. And of course, this is one of the most exciting part ng ating transition period is yung IGRB, yung Intergovernmental Relations Body chaired by Secretary Dominguez and ni Minister Iqbal. Dun sa ating 6874 or sa 9054 ng ARMM, wala pong ganitong mechanism. Kaya maraming misunderstanding between the national government and the ARMM leadership on issues. For example, yung LTO, yung pagpaplaka, yung ating Coast Guard, kanino ba sila magre-report, yung ating PNP, yung jurisdiction ng ProBarm, of Police Regional Office. Because of the IGRB, medyo naging relax na lang because there is a formal conversation or formal mechanism na pwedeng pag-usapan yung differences between the regional and national governments. So these are just some of the things na hindi pa natin na-activate so far, including yung ating Philippine Congress Bangsamoro Parliament Forum, where do the local legislations stay or where do they place themselves in the national legislative agenda, for example, and yung interagency committee for purposes ng ating transition period, hindi pa po na-activate. Kabilang na rin yung ating pagpasok ng former combatants to the Philippine National Police. So ang dami pa, including yung ating Bangsamoro Local Government Finance Office, wala pa po. Yung joint exploration ng ating fossil fuels, ng ating uranium, and ng natural gas in the areas of Sulusi, for example, and Diligwasan Marsh, hindi pa pag-uusapan yan ng IGRB. And to think we are already preparing ourselves for the national election. So magbabago yung composition ng ating national government pagka nagpatuloy to post-2022. And nandito na, of course, yung mga GOCC na ilipat sa BARM, yung ating Bangsamoro Sustainable Development Board, yung Intergovernmental Infra Development Board. Yung pinakamagandang example dito, yung area ng Pagalungan ng Datu Montawal na gitna sa pagitan ng Kabakan at ng Pikit. So yung kalsada doon, kailangan pag-usapan kung kanino siya ilalodge, no? Kung kay legislative area ba ng North Cotabato or mag-intercede na si Bangsamoro government. So may mga ganong area, especially dun sa mga nasa likurang barangay ng Pikit, yung mga nag-vote ng yes. How do we coincide yung kanilang trans-barangay road, no? Hindi pa yung napag-uusapan in our dialogue with the national government. So marami pang kailangan pag-usapan because of our shared borders with regions that are subscribing to the concentration powers of the national government. So most specifically yung ating region 9, 10, and 12. ito lang yung pinaka gusto lang nating i-emphasize, yung ating normalization. Sobrang bigat pa, no? Kasi from last year, that's just 12,000 combatants who received 100,000 each. Ang pangako po sa kanila ay 1 milyong piso na combination ng education, socio-economic, etc. Hindi pa po nabibigyan. Kabilang na rin dito yung usapin sa ating camp transformation. Kung mapapansin nyo, yung track talaga ng transition period ay hindi lang po talaga para sana sa MILF pero sa kanilang combatants specifically. So pag nawalan po ng opportunity yun, baka magkaroon tayo ng problema with Sprout or other offshoot groups in the process. And most vulnerable dito yung mga kabataan. Buti na lang, as mentioned earlier by Kuya Kenny, inadapt ng ating regional government yung ating youth priority agenda. Dito nakalagay yung karapatan ng bawat kabataan na maging parte ng ating regional decision-making initiatives. Si Kuya Marge, yung naka-green, siya yung, I can say, and I hope kung may mag-screen video man ito, Kuya Marge, yung mukha ng ating kabataan sa Bangsamoro ngayon. And he's sitting there as a youth representative in the Bangsamoro Parliament while concurrently serving as the chair of the BYC. So merong space. This is siguro unprecedented, no? Because kadalasan sa ating local government, provincial government, mga SK lang yung umuupo. Minsan yung mga SK natin hindi pa talaga truly representative of the youth agenda, but hopefully in the Bangsamoro we can correct those ills, no, with our youth representative. Yan nga, sila yung may coordinating power kung kailangan ng social development office ng isang program at kabataan yung involved, lalapit siya kay BYC para makipagtulungan. So similar with other programs including in health, in education, in employment. So sila yung nasa gitna. That's a very good crucial position for the BYC. Pero may mga problema. Isa lang yung reserve seat sa parliament. We need more. I wanted to share this with you because without prejudice to the current members of our parliament, medyo outnumbered, no, yung ating representation in the parliament. If I can count it correct right now, there are only at least 6 people who are below 30 or below 40 years old. So the rest are either 40s, in their 50s, and we have a significant numbers of our elders who are in the parliament. Sana if ever lang we get to elect regular members in the parliament, or should it be extended, we get more young people in the youth representation sa BARM. Kahit hindi na po reserve seat, but as regular members of the parliament. So yung heart lang naman talaga ng transition natin, mag-i-impact talaga siya sa kabataan. Dun sa area ng SPMS box in Maguindanao, this is unfortunately what we refer to as the Syria of Central Mindanao, because of the endless cycles of violence and polarizations of extremist groups. Ang dami-dami nila. In fact, I was with the BYC officials yesterday, and for the past few days, they were telling me that from 2 youth organizations, umakyat yung kanilang youth organizations into 30 plus. So what does that say? No? Some are already organizing groups that may either be political or that may either be a response because of the extremist movement in the geographic area. So malaking problema lang po sa kabataan ngayon yung polarization and yung politicking of youth organizations in various BARM areas. Marami nagsusulputang mga kabataang grupo na sometimes the youth, when they get frustrated, pag binigyan ng opportunity, kakagatin nila yan. And they will organize themselves and they will echo messaging in support of those who are helping them organize themselves. So malaking problema yan ngayon. We are seeing this in the island provinces, in Maguindanao, and even in Lanao del Sur and the 63 barangays in North Cotabato. Iniipon sila, no? By some whose intents are quite different from the peace process agenda. Of course, andyan yung subsectors of the youth. May hirap talagang, iba yung dynamics talaga sa BARM ng kabataan. May super ultra religious groups, merong academic yung perspective, that's why more liberal. Iba't ibang socio-civic priorities. So these are some of the things that we need to look into during the transition period. And of course, andun yung clamor for change. Hindi natin pwedeng, hindi madaling i-invite yung mga kabataang Bangsamoro sa paniniwala sa konsepto ng moral governance. Dahil sobrang bilis nung kanilang, everything is an instant sa mga kabataan ngayon. That's why Instagram, there's instant tweets, instant posts. So mahirap talaga silang dalhin dito sa pamunuan or sa direksyon ng pamunuan ng Bangsamoro government dahil gusto yung instant change. Andun yung mga frustrations ng kanilang employment and entrepreneurship na dadagdagan pa ng ating um, pandemic. And of course, yung mga laging naiiwan sa gulo ng mga offshoot extremist groups. As said earlier, last year in Pagalungan and in Pikit is just super tragic, no, yung mga nangyari dun sa ating mga kababayan in those areas. And of course, andyan pa yung island and mainland differences. As you can see, there are youth organizations in the provinces of Sulu, for example, and Basilan that are heavily campaigning against the BARMM leadership. So these are young men young men and women na nakasama natin. In fact, some of them have also took part in creating the BYTPA before, but are now changing their narratives and perspectives. Before I leave this topic, I know this is not the platform, but I hope our friends in the Ateneus and in other humanitarian and civil society organizations can help me echo this message kasi hindi siya napag-uusapan dito sa areas ng Pulumulok and Tupi in South Cotabato. Tuloy-tuloy yung patayan sa mga Moro communities. It's essentially an ethnic cleansing all over again, and we are turning our blind eye in this situation. I truly subscribe to Professor Rufa's discussion earlier on transitional justice, and we cannot move forward with TJR if these things are continuing to happen in the areas of Mindanao. So just in 2018, unfortunately, even the data is so raw that they need to get it from Brigada. So that's how worse the situation is because the media is turning blind eye in the massive killing situation in South Cotabato. So 65, no, most of these are young men, youth, moros, no, who are apparently being tagged as extremists, where in fact they are not. So before I end my conversation, and just to pay homage to the brains behind the comprehensive agreement on the Bangsamoro and the framework agreement on the Bangsamoro, this agreement creates a new political entity and it deserves a name that symbolizes and honors the struggles of our forebears in Mindanao and celebrates the history and the character of that part of our nation. That name will be Bangsamoro. Yun lamang po. Maraming salamat at wassalam.
Thank you so much, George. At this point, you will immediately proceed to the question and answer. So if you have questions, you can just speak up. Or if you're shy, you can type it. You can input it in our chat box and I will read them. So questions? Okay, so for our first question, I think this is addressed to Professor Giam. With respect to, yes, you mentioned earlier about your suggestion for the role of youth in terms of researching into the past cases of human rights violations. What do you think are the issues that should be highlighted for future researches pertaining to human rights violation in the Bangsamoro? Is she here?
Is Professor Guillaume still here with us? Or are there any connectivity issues that we're experiencing?
Yeah, I'm still here. Sorry, I was out to the bathroom for a while.
Yes, maybe you can repeat the question,
Okay.
Steffi, please.
You mentioned earlier, Prof, that one of the things that the youth can take part in is in with respect to transitional justice is to engage in researches about human rights violation in the Bangsamoro. There's a question if what are the issues that should be specifically highlighted in this researches about human rights violations in the Bangsamoro?
To start off, you need to look at the circumstances that led to these human rights violations, because no less than the United Nations declares the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, each group of people is entitled to assert the right to self-determination, for example. And for example, in the many atrocities committed against the Bangsamoro, especially during martial law, in fact, we did already a listening process to over 200 communities affected by conflict, and where many communities suffered from massacres and displacements of thousands. One of these is to unearth and to provide documentation on why this happened, because it's not right that the sitting government will declare that a group of people has no right to stay, to live, actually, just because they belong to another identity. We have to, I mean, no less than, as I said, the United Nations and other international conventions have declared that there should be no discrimination on the basis of race or religion or of any other lifestyle. And in fact, now, because we're moving towards an inclusive era, nobody should be left behind. So human rights violations in itself, I mean, that is a serious violation against a people's right to exist. So even those who are considered less human beings than others, as long as they're human beings, even those who are even suspected of nefarious crimes, they are still allowed a day in court. Nobody has the right to kill them. So, and that is why the drug war is an example of a massive state-driven atrocity, because you are declaring, you are acting like a god. You will declare who gets to live and who gets to die. Nobody has the right to do that except God. And so they have to look at all the circumstances that have given rise to these violations. During our time when we were doing the researches in these communities, we learned that people were just, they were just in the communities. I know that because I have niece-in-law. I mean, the daughter of my sister-in-law. She just disappeared right before her eyes, because she was just lying in her crib. She was a month-old baby then, and her mother just went inside the kitchen to check on her cooking. When she came back, blood was splattered all over the place. I mean, just because of shrapnel that hit her and just blown her to smithereens. I mean, this is an innocent child who's killed in this senseless war, in this war which is not of their own making. Why are they made to suffer? So all these things, because this will aggravate, this will become an aggravating circumstance to the act of bombing a place. And these people are defenseless. They have, so when, for example, when police officers argue that nanlaban yung mga tao, how can a 7-year-old child pick up a gun and fight against police officers, and he becomes a casualty in this deadly war? So things like that, because all of this will point to the grave abuse of authority by the state.
Thank you so much, Prof.
Mm-mm.
So,
Sorry, I was out for a while. So I
okay,
didn't
it's
know I
okay.
couldn't-
Can I also
For-
add something or share a relevant discussion
Sure,
on the
sure,
question po?
sure.
But while it is not primarily more on research on human rights violations or injustices, primarily it's also important to highlight that Al-Kalam Institute started as a research institute. In fact, we have a research journal called ICRA, and we accommodate graduate and undergraduate researchers. And in fact, we have actually a component of our key peace project right now with our partners from Germany in CPS. We will be conducting a peace education research conference inshallah next year. And one of our goals is to be able to promote different initiatives on the integration of peace education. Let's highlight that the Commission on Higher Education last 2019 released a CMO or a CHED Memorandum Order number 1, integration of peace studies or education
Yes.
in the relevant higher education curricula. While we appreciate the efforts of the MSU system for they were able to put up their FPA 101 as a subject, other schools also with autonomous status are also having their own peace education subject, but others who are still under the jurisdiction of the CHED are still yet to offer their own subject. So integration is significant. So maybe it's important to consider as a research, as a potential research on how your academic institutions are able to be compliant to this CHED Memorandum Order on how peace education is integrated into the existing curricula. Other than the peace education, CMO number 2 naman is integration of indigenous people studies. So it's also important to highlight on how our academic institutions, primarily, which is a very good and a platform for really pushing for the mainstreaming of peace education and indigenous peoples integration. How are our academic institution working on this? And if ever po may mga ganong researches kayo na ginagawa, we would be happy if once we post our call for abstracts, we would be very much happy to hear to have your researches included in our next journal to be published po, accommodating undergrad and graduate studies on peace education, indigenous peoples communities, as well as on violent extremism, preventing violent extremism, as well as yung mga transition efforts of the Bangsamoro government. Ayun po.
Can I add 1 minute intervention? Now that you have mentioned academic institutions, I think we should pay attention that the newly passed Bangsamoro Education Code has included very clear provisions for integration of peace education, not only in the higher education, but starting at the basic early education, because I still believe that what you learn to be useful in your life, you learn in your kindergarten years or even in your basic education years. So it's nice to start the shift of thinking from a culture of war to a culture of peace at the beginning of a child's existence in his life, that you always guide that individual to be more peaceful, to be more inclusive, to hold dear the values of preserving life than cutting it short. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. and Sir Kenny. There's a question, I think, from Gwen.
Yeah, thanks to Steffi. I think it's both a question and an insight or a point of reflection for me after listening to all the great talks from our speakers. I think I'm speaking as a student journalist and as someone who's also covered a few or written a few articles in the past about the Bangsamoro. I just have this, I don't know, it's a reflection based on my experience that me as a student journalist would feel that, you know, I've done something because I've written about the struggles of our Moro brothers and sisters, but it I feel like that doesn't really come to fruition entirely, because I would realize that my readers aren't really that interested, or aren't really that uh, it's not that they're not really that interested, maybe because these topics aren't topics that directly affect them. I mean, maybe that's uh, an exception would be those who've actually experienced being in or living or having Bangsamoro relatives and friends. But sometimes it's difficult because students, for example, in Ateneo, wouldn't really be that interested to read about stories like this one. And I think one of the difficulties is because aside from the fact that it's not that relatable because they're not those places, they're not living those lives. I think another difficulty is because of the broad concepts that we normally associate um, with uh, with discussions on BOL, for example, or on the Marawi rehabilitation. Because when we say transitional justice or when we say peace, these are very big concepts that they might not be that might intimidate them to an extent, or that they think are too academic and they don't want to engage in these concepts. So um siguro my question would be, how would we how best do we present or package concepts like this one, so that people will, especially young people, will want to engage, will want to pay attention to these issues?
Who do you want to answer that? Any one of us?
Sige po. Okay lang po ba kung mauna, Prof? Kasi kayo po nauna kanina. At least.
Yeah, I think the best, I mean, as an editor for a community paper for 5 years, what will really tickle the interest of the reading public is human interest, meaning you relate the story to any story that any Juan Maria or Abdul or Isa can relate to. So it's stories about life and death. Everyone experiences life and death. I mean, there's a death in the family, and it could be caused by artificial or arbitrary means, and it could be caused by natural causes. But so things like this are universals. You focus on the universals. The other thing is, this is the lack of interest could be attributed to the fact that we have a long, centuries old divide or schism, or what we can consider as an uh, intended effort to make Filipinos fight against each other. Because you see there is this phenomenon of othering in the social sciences. If you consider yourselves as us and them, you start looking at differences rather than the commonalities. Then people will always be driven by, oh, we don't like these people because they don't believe in the same things that we believe in. We tend to become ethnocentric. We tend to believe that any other culture aside from our own are inferior to us. So I think we start by creating the what we might call the enabling environment for people to understand each other better, is to offer peace education in all levels, starting with, as I said, in the kindergarten, when children are made to appreciate that the world has been beautiful because it's made of people of diverse backgrounds. If we were a world composed of uniform or only one group of people, it would be a boring world. And I think you can always go back to the story of the little prince who was looking for a friend, and when he came across a planet that was composed of things looking the same thing, he never recognized who his friend is. Uniformity is not the nature of the world, diversity is. And so if God has designed this, however you call your God, if God has designed this world to be diverse, the next best thing that we can do to respect that is to accept that and to appreciate that. It would be a boring world if all of us look the same. We would be like manufactured things, like there is a serial number at the backs of our bodies to distinguish us from others. We would not recognize who our wives and husbands would be because all of us would be looking the same thing. I dread a day when people will have that kind of thinking that we will be made uniform in terms of our thoughts and our attitudes and our characteristics. That's the beauty of the world. That's the challenges of dealing with diversity, because diversity is the reality of human life. Thank you.
Siguro to add up po with the discussion, okay lang? Can I add to discussion? Siguro, maybe one thing also, as you mentioned, is use of terms. No, that's actually one challenge that we have encountering for several times. No, that it's too academic. It's too parang abstract. No, we're using terms. For example, PVE. Many would say na even when you go to simple communities, which do they know more, terrorism or about extremism? Would they say, are they the same? So parang the misinformation starts with the terms used. No, that's why it's important to highlight also the importance of localization. That's why when we conduct intervention, it's also appropriate that you engage appropriate stakeholders. For example, in the case of our efforts in the communities, there are recommendations of, for example, ang mga interventions are implemented not in English, or for example, may mga forms na pinapa-fill upan, what we use are localized languages. For example, if it's in Maguindanao, we translate the forms to Maguindanaon, or if the area is mostly Maranao, we try to conduct the activities in Maranao. Or we don't require our speakers to fully speak in English. Rather, we wanted for them to be able, not just the speakers, even the reactors or the participants, we don't force them to speak in English or Tagalog as long as they're able to express themselves. Because when the language itself limits their capacity to share, that's already a big chunk of information you should have captured. So in other words, it's important to promote localization and efforts and to really look on the local context, because one does not fit all. It's also important to highlight that there is a need to look at the local context. Second concern is the need for to understand that we are a diverse community, as emphasized by by Professor Rufagyam. No? At the end of the day, it's social cohesion is the campaign, no? And kung sa simple terms pa, we have to understand na laylay kita, no? That we cannot really impose to other people what we want. And on the question on relatability, Davao is not excuse to potential impacts of conflict. In fact, Davao has its own share of experience. We in Ateneo has witnessed how, and not just Ateneo but Davaoenos has witnessed how it has impact our communities here in the Roas Night Market, in Davao Airport, in Davao Port, no? Other areas of the country has experienced the worst in Cotabato City, in Zamboanga, no? In Marawi, no? And this can happen anywhere, even in other countries, no? Even the capitals of these countries who claim that they have strong security has been affected by the impacts of this violent extremism. It doesn't excuse anybody, no? In other words, it's important to highlight na yun na nga, we start with the education. And siguro to end, hindi lang doon sa mainstream education, but highlight also the local community education. That's why we also support civil society organizations conducting to actual communities, to young leaders. Kaya po ang ginagol natin sa Sala Movement, we don't just talk to the student leaders, we also talk to the community, out of school youth, religious youth. Different sectors should be to be recognized, because when they're given opportunity to talk, that's already for them an opportunity to kumbaga they belong. Balik tayo doon sa IBP nung Alcalam. When they given a chance to be part of the discussion, they tend to have that sense of greater purpose to push for their agenda and be able to also push for appropriate actions. sana for the positive radicalization, not negative, nor on violent extremism. Sige po. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sir Kenny and Professor Guillaume, for sharing your thoughts and insights. Also, thank you. We are grateful for our reactors, George and Kyle, for sharing your time this afternoon. I know it's a weekend. Thank you also to our participants for giving your time, for allotting time um, for this webinar. We will have webinars, other webinars, I think pretty soon. And if you want to have or to know more about them or be informed about them, you can follow, you can like our Facebook page, Youth Peace Mission. We will post there our future webinars, information on our future webinars. But before we officially end, I think Ian has something to say.
Yes, picture muna tayo. Actually, I'm gonna call the technical team to lead us. Gwen?
Ako na lang mag-picture, Kuya Ian. Kay meron ano si
Alright, sige.
Sige. Can I request everyone to turn on their cameras if you can, please?
Yeah.
Ayan. Sige. On my, sige. 1, 2, 3. Okay, perfect.
Okay, thank you, Gwen. We'd also like to thank Ate News for your technical help, and also everyone. Thank you again, and hope to see you in our next webinar. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Po.
Thank you.
Assalamualaikum.